How and why regenerative, organic, and conventional farming practices are going to fuse in the very near future. That's our topic in today's XtremeAg's Cutting the Curve.
Welcome to XtremeAg's Cutting the Curve podcast, where real farmers share real insights and real results to help you improve your farming operation. And now, here's your host, Damian Mason.
Hey there, welcome to another fantastic episode of XtremeAg's Cutting the Curve. It's me, Damian Mason. You knew that because you heard in the introduction. I've got Kelly Garrett here, one of the founders of XtremeAg, and we're joined by Josh Miller. Josh and I have become fast friends. I had him on my Business of Agriculture show, and we talked a lot about the future as it might be impacted from some changes at the United States Department of Agriculture that might involve Robert F. Kennedy Jr., so I encourage you to check that out. We don't get terribly political. We just talk about the actual industry and some activism against it or for it. And that got us thinking about this kind of topic. RFK Jr., by the time you're listening to this, we might know that if Trump wins, he's promised that he is going to be within the United States Department of Agriculture, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and it's brought to the forefront a lot of discussion about regenerative agriculture. He's a huge proponent of it. There's certain things about agriculture that he rails against. I think it's a little bit of a trust fund sort of guy from Massachusetts, sort of a methodology, but he's very anti-chemistry. He's very anti-large-scale farms. Well, that's a neat idea, but also it can't feed the world. So what we're talking about is where these things can fuse. Organic has some very good merits. Regenerative is a new concept. Got some very good merits. Conventional farming, well, it got us here, and we've got surpluses, even though we have 8 billion mouths to feed. So there's a lot to be said for all three of the systems. Kelly and Josh are going to talk about how we see this fusion coming together. And by the way, if you are a zealot, if you are an organic zealot, or if you are by God, I'm going to till until they take away my tractor keys, this episode may not be for you because there's probably no changing you. This is for the minds that are in the middle that realize we're all on an evolution. Kelly, did I state that right?
Yes, people that are open to evolution.
You're not a zealot, but you're doing regenerative practices now in Crawford County, Iowa, that you weren't doing 5 years ago and sure as hell weren't doing 25 years ago.
That's true. I am not married to any practice. I'm not married to any product or anything like that. I would tell you that I just try to be about the science, and I try to just keep getting better. And, the definition of better isn't always necessarily yield. It's sometimes reducing the cost. It's sometimes reducing a practice, which reduces a cost. It's about ROI, and it's the short-term ROI and the long-term ROI. Sometimes the things we do for soil health have a short-term expense, but they have a long-term gain. That's what RegenAg is to me.
You pointed out before we hit record, it's important to understand the difference. So the person listening to this works in agriculture. They understand the difference. But in case we're sharing this with someone that's not in the farming game, conventional, we're talking about, when I say conventional, I mean everything that is happening on farms in America. Yes, using chemistry. Yes, perhaps using genetically engineered crops for seed. Mm-hmm. Yes, doing some tillage. And pretty much what all the universities have done, places like Purdue or Iowa State have taken us to this point, and we have amazing amounts of productivity, but we also are starting to admit there's some sins that have gone with that. We've overused fertility in particular. You want to touch on that? Then we're going to go to Josh.
We've overused synthetic fertility, and we have thrown in my position. This is a broad statement, but we've thrown soil out of balance. We don't understand the nitrogen cycle. We don't understand P and K. We don't understand what comes along with that P and K. Potash, or muriate of potash, is the most widely known potassium fertilizer, dry fertilizer on the face of the earth. And why is it the most widely used? It's the cheapest. And it's potassium chloride, KCl. And so when a farmer puts on OO60, which is the symbol for it, you're getting 60 pounds of K, 40 pounds of chloride, Cl. What does that do to your soil? I don't think farmers know. The reason I become in tune to this is because of the plant food byproduct I spray, and farmers always want to know what's harmful about it. So we'll talk about all the things that are in plant food. And of course, because I'm competing against the local ag retails, they'll tell people there's too much salt in it. Well, they're referring to sodium. And there's about 40 pounds of sodium in my product that I put on, at the standard rate. Sodium washes out in our environment very, very easy, things like that. That's a very low volume. The 40 pounds of chloride that we're putting on doesn't wash out. And I think that there's just a real lack of education on on what's going on. Then when you want to talk about soil health and things like that, or plant health, the overuse of nitrogen, the overuse of all of the synthetic fertilities, we should try to learn how to work in tune with Mother Nature, not to even be organic or environmental. The reason is to become more efficient and the I score to ultimately become more profitable. I'm trying to become as profitable as possible.
Yeah. And so, I mean, again, we're not judging. I've got a buddy that's an organic farmer 10 miles from here, and he's not a zealot. He said it's really simple. I didn't come into this with a lot of capital. I was young. He said, I can make a lot more margin on per acre by doing organic. And that's why he does it. And granted, he's a soils guy, but he does it not out of zealotry, but out of margin, out of profit.
If he's doing it, then that's the right reason to do it. And if he has a market for those products, that's great. In Western Iowa, I don't have a great market for those products. So I don't judge anybody at all. Yeah. I'm just trying to say I'm trying to become as efficient as possible. That's not efficient for me in my hills.
So, Josh, Dr. Josh Miller, if you're watching, he wrote this book right here that's in my hand called Peeling Back the Labels. He is not an ag guy from birth, but he joined ag. He's got a whole bunch of degrees. And he wrote this book right here. And this is kind of what you're addressing. First off, it's not I work for one of the 4 big chemical company, multinational companies, and so I'm going to go out and just be, their mouthpiece. It's more that you're saying, hey, this doesn't mean that there's not several right answers. That's kind of the approach you took.
Yeah, I think it comes down to worldview. We talked about last week that a lot of people have a worldview that there's a good guy and a bad guy in every situation, and I really don't tend to operate that way. I think that we're all trying to do the best we can, but when we paint one thing or one process or one method as bad, inherently bad, and I think that's what really happens with what we call conventional agriculture, or as you know, the zealots on the other side would call it chemical agriculture. I think that's what's happening. Instead of saying, hey, this is the evolution we've had in the agricultural industry, since World War II, with the advent of synthetic fertilizers and chemicals to get us to the productive level that we're at today, where we can start to have conversations because we are feeding the world cheaply, especially this country, feeding them cheaply, that we can turn our attention now to how can we do it better. We've been trying to do that the entire way, but when you just label it as, well, they must be bad because chemicals are bad or GMOs are bad, then we're just taking tools off of out of our toolbox there where we can't use them. And what we talked about a lot last week was when we just label this one thing as bad and say by government fiat that you're not going to be able to use that anymore. Well, that throws everything into chaos. And what's it going to look like when you take all these tools out? We are naturally and use the word evolution. We're evolving with our understanding about how to do things better, whether it's understanding the soils, understanding of just crop nutrition in general, understanding of different interactions between diseases and insects and fertility. We're always learning how to do things better, and we're naturally doing that. Kelly is a perfect example of that. There's farmers all over this country. A lot of them, I would say probably more, like majority of them, are trying to do things better. So we're already going that way. That's the point. I want to talk more about how we're already going that way with this concept of regenerative and what Kelly is doing. I think people are going to be really, especially not people that are not in the agricultural industry, should be really optimistic about the way farming is going right now, and what farmers are learning, how we're moving forward with this thing.
About a year and a half ago, a little less than that. I'm at Kelly's farm, and he's hosting a whole bunch of people that were there, and they were the furthest thing from ag people, and they were the furthest thing from Iowa. I mean, you got people from fashion types from Europe, and folks that work for large corporations in places like Seattle and Portland. So to say that they were, but they came and they listened, and they obviously came with preconceived notions. And they had this idea that a guy like Kelly is out there, his cowboy hat on and running around dumping chemicals out the back of the F-150, whatever. And he started talking about what's really happening. And it was really interesting to see because there's an honesty to it. And he said, yeah, we still use these products. What about GMOs? He says, yeah, we don't even use genetically engineered corn anymore. And it's not for the reasons that you think. It's not because you protested outside of outside of the Washington Monument. We did it because what makes sense for our operation. And I like that it's happening. I get a little concerned about the idea that the government's going to tell us how to do this when it's already happening on forward-linking farms like yours. So talk about your journey to regenerative. Because I told you at that thing, Kelly, I said, you know what? A regenerative purist would bristle that you're calling yourself regenerative. You're journeying into regenerative, but a purist might not think that you're as regen as you should be. And that's where you start getting to this thing of, I'm more organic than you, I'm more pure than you, or whatever.
I think that a purist does what Josh said earlier, where they paint one thing bad and another thing good. I think that a purist believes that there's a black and white decision. There's not. I'm simply trying to find the way to educate myself for what's best for my farm in my region, and what's best for Temple in Maryland, not too far from Josh, or Chad in Alabama, is completely different, potentially, some of the things different than what's good here. And in some of the ways we're going away from synthetics, and other ways we don't use much traded corn anymore because we get a better yield out of the untraded corn, but we run insecticide on every acre. There's a synthetic, things like that. I'm trying to do what makes my farm most profitable and maintain the soil health, or build the soil health. And that's a purist would tell you you shouldn't run the insecticide. A purist would tell you all those things. It's not black and white. And I think that with soils like space, the final frontier, we know so little about it, and we have forgot so many concepts of again, back to pre-World War II when the synthetic fertility came about. I think there's a lot of lost practices, the lost art of farming, if you will, that we need to relearn that can take us to the next yield level, and then obviously will take us to the next profit level.
Josh, you don't talk much. You talk a lot about organic and GMOs and chemistry and the use of science, and et cetera. You don't get into soil much. And that's where this regenerative thing, that I give them credit. I picked up Gabe Brown's book, Dirt to Soil, several years ago. I've had him on on my show, The Business of Agriculture. I've met him personally and heard him speak. He, and the regenerative thing sort of is a soil-focused farming concept, and I guess that's why I'm so open to it and a cheerleader for it, because it starts with soil, and that's one thing you didn't really get into over here.
I'm sorry. That's book number 2, I guess. Okay. No. I mean, but it's interesting. So, like you mentioned earlier, I wasn't born into this farming thing, but I got done my master's in genetics sitting at a lab bench. I was like, I can't do this anymore. So I got a job as a crop scout with a local ag retailer here in Maryland, and just wanted to learn about farming because it was outside. And I learned a lot through that process. And I eventually moved into territory, and I talked to you about this example. My farmers and I were always trying to do what was best on their farm. That was my role on their operation. And it was different for every single guy. They had different yield goals. They had different soil types. They had different, some had animals on their farm. Some didn't. We had to work with each individual as an individual. And I think that's farming in general. But we were, I said this one example in Maryland. This kind of goes to when the government and some people think that they know what's best for the environment or for farms or for agriculture. They started to really push the idea of cover crops, and we were already getting into that kind of naturally in Pennsylvania and Maryland to a degree, learning what cover crops could do for an operation, whether it was increasing, nitrogen, whether it was helping break up some soil compaction with radishes, whether it was trying to increase soil tilth, whether we're trying to add organic matter to the soil. We were learning some of that. When Maryland, because Maryland is what it is, they were like, no, government's going to help you do this. So they gave money for farmers to plant cover crops. And the inevitability of it was that the farmers would say, okay, well, I'm getting this money to plant cover crops. They planted the least amount that they had to plant to get the check. They put it in the very last day that they were allowed to put it in because they had other things going on, and they didn't learn how to do it. And not every farmer. I'm not trying to castigate farmers. I'm castigating the process in general. That when we say that government gets involved, it drives me nuts. So in Maryland, they had this whole program here to save the bay. We're going to plant cover crops. And it didn't go well because nobody learned which cover crops to plant, when to plant them, how much to plant, in what rotation. Pennsylvania didn't get any money for it. And those cover crops took off because we're really learning how this works in individual farmers' rotations. We're increasing yield because we're increasing, the overall soil health of things. And I think that goes and paints a picture of what farmers, what they naturally do. They learn how to work with their soils and their farms. We're learning more through this regenerative process what that means. That's the direction we need to keep promoting and pushing. Education, let farmers take the lead on this because it's their ground, it's their land, they know it best. And experts that can come in can help learn along the way. We don't need to get into politics of it again today, but when somebody, Big Brother says, no, you have to do it this way, that's when things go awry.
Yeah, I want to get into that, and I want to talk about cover crops because we're talking about Kelly's evolution that I think more farms are going to do, and I hope they do. And again, if you're hardcore, if you're one of those guys on Twitter that wanted to fight with me about how tillage and letting your soil blow away is great, fine, great, hang up. Anyway, before we get to all that, I got to remind you that Nature's is one of our friends here at XtremeAg, and Nature's is focused on providing sustainable farming solutions and helping maintain crop genetic potential for today and for your future generations. Nature's high-quality liquid fertilizers powered by Nature's BioK can be targeted at specific periods of influence throughout the growing season via precision placement techniques as a means to mitigate plant stress, enhance crop yield, and also, more importantly, boost your farm's ROI. You just heard it from Kelly. Big decreases in amount of synthetic fertility, flinging it out there in the fall. Don't do that much anymore. Using products like Nature's and putting it at nutrition exactly where it needs to be when the plant needs it, and you get a big environmental benefit. You get a big economic benefit. Go to natures.com and check it out. I want to just point out that I wasn't criticizing his book for not having more of a soil reference. He took it that way. And then you know what he did? Guy over here with 4 degrees and letters after his name. He used the word castigate twice. In 3.5 years of recording the XtremeAg Cutting the Curve, you are the first guest to use the word castigate, not just once, but twice. And I appreciate that. Duly noted. All right. Your journey to the regen thing, first off, I would say, Kelly, was just figuring out how to use less. And you've done your nitrogen reduction studies where you go out and reduce that. That's the path toward regenerative. You've done a thing where you cut way back on dry fertility. That's regenerative. You are one of the few XtremeAg people, you and Temple are the only two that have livestock. Livestock factors into this as part of the soil cycle. Kind of talk to me about where the first was cutting back on the spend and the inputs. The second was then focusing on the soil, from what I've seen for my 3.5 years with you. Am I right about that? And then I want you to talk about how you're bringing the cattle into it.
Yes, the soil is the key. A friend of mine, I would like to work more with him. His name's Al Toops. He told me that the key is in the soil and that the plant is secondary. We always worry about the crop we're raising, things like that. Al's point was, if you can figure out the soil, the plant will take care of itself. It very much is secondary. And I had a really hard time wrapping my head around that. Still don't know that I totally can, but if I do a good job with the balance of the soil, then the plant is secondary and it just kind of happens on its own, happens naturally. You know what I mean? And we do still supplement the plant in a foliar process, things like that. Sometimes some elements or nutrients that we need to use become tied up in the soil so fast and so easily that we still need to treat the plant to achieve those higher yields. But yeah, I very much am about the soil. The cattle, where I'm sitting here in my office, this farm had cattle on it very extensively. In the January and February, it's cold and snowy. We need to feed the cows. We fed them a lot in this field. Not coincidentally, it's one of our highest yields. And some of it's because of the manure, but part of it is because of our no-till corn on corn. That residue gets broken down from the cattle walking all the time. And, carbon is neither, the residue is carbon, obviously. Carbon is neither created nor destroyed, it's just transferred. And the cattle are a carbon transfer device. They speed it up. And so to say that the cattle are not good for the atmosphere, I'm not trying to be political, but to say that cattle are not good for the atmosphere or the environment is really kind of bullshit. Yeah, right. Because they are good because they speed up the transfer of the carbon. And that's what happens on our farm. Our best yields are where the cattle stay the longest.
Not to mention, like you said, they help the carbon transfer. Not to mention they can take indigestible cellulosic fiber and turn it into protein, which humans can digest. Which
Damian, can I ask Kelly a question?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't want to take your moderator.
Don't be sorry. Don't be sorry.
Here. You know, I didn't want to take your.
Me.
I know I didn't. Hey, this is your gig. I'm just a guest on it. So, Kelly, do you think it's easier to be regenerative when you have animals?
Yes.
Because that's a question I have. People want you not to use synthetic fertilizers, but an alternative. I mean, if you can get your soils running, I guess, amazingly well, and try to incorporate green manures in there with cover crops and things like that. I guess at some point you eventually could, but the alternative is poop, right? I mean, it's animal poop, but that's also the thing that the people that I find that don't want you to use synthetic fertilizers, they also don't want animals out there either, and it's this really hard thing where it's like, well, we can't reduce all these animals and not have them out there and also not use any other fertility sources. There's this crazy wanting everything.
It's very circular, very holistic. The animals, the plants, the soil back. It in a lot of ways, Josh, this is a little dreamy, but agriculture, it's like the movie Avatar come to life. The connection to the earth, the connection to the animals, things like that. I don't mean to sound dreamy about it, but it very much is. What
movie came to life?
Avatar.
Oh, okay. Hey, I want to go out there and say, again, on this, we talked about the fusion, and we called this episode How and Why the Regenerative, Organic, and Conventional Farm Practice Will Ultimately Fuse. Let's talk about the struggle. It's not been hard for you. You've done it in bites. The person that says, that won't work here. By the way, Josh, you said you're not a farm guy.
It's been hard.
A farmer's favorite thing to say, and Kelly will back me up on this. Remember, a farmer loves to tell everybody that whatever they're doing is the best way to do it, and anything else won't work here. I've had to hear it won't work here. I've had people within the same township of my county tell me that won't work here. Well, it works a mile and a half down the road. How does it not work here? So anyway, go ahead. Mm-hmm. How do you see the fusion happening, and will it?
Is that for me or Josh?
You.
I believe the fusion will happen because of finances. Regulatory from the government, programs from the government, which, I don't necessarily like either. The government requires when you put in a cover crop, they want you to use rye, cereal rye. I think that's the worst thing to use, and I think that's a lot of reason the farmers get turned off of it. Yep. Cereal rye is something that it's a 4-letter word here. I will not use it. Yep. Now, I do have a field drilled to cereal rye that I will chop. And I will remove it. But to have it as a cover crop, it's a scavenger. It takes up a lot of nutrition. Then it's hard to terminate, hard to get the crop. I've had a couple disasters on this regenerative journey, figuring that out, greatly reduce the corn yield. And now I very much believe in cover crops, but not cereal rye. Yep. So I would tell you that it's not been easy because we've stubbed our toe. I'm just very stubborn. But that is what farmers say, though, is that it won't work here. Like no-till won't work here, cover crops won't work here, things like that. I think you just need to learn what works in your geography, but the word won't is, again, black and white, and that nothing is ever black and white.
No, and usually it's just an excuse to continue doing what they want to do. I mean, you hear that all the time. So, by the way, you are right. I predict this fusion, absolutely. It's already happening. I mean, that's why it's not hard to say it's going to happen. It already is happening. So, for instance, you can say, well, I'm not doing anything organic. Well, you're being encouraged to reduce your, and it's going to be either by government regulation, as you said, or it's going to be because of the economics. We're heading into some pretty down economics. I would think that of all times you would be open to beginning your journey toward regenerative, cut back on all the chemistry right now.
Envision this. We're in a down economic time from the commodity markets. And we're, a little frustration because we haven't heard any more news on the 45Z tax credit, probably because of the election. They're going to punt it until after the election. Mm-hmm. So we're in a down economic time. We get through the election and 45Z comes out. There's 2 economic factors that might push you to regen, because the 45Z being all about a CI score. CI score is the very definition of regenerative ag to me, because it forces you to go in that direction. So we're in a down economic time. We want a premium for our grain. Here comes 45Z. We'll have to see what happens when we get through the election, but there's the financial encouragement that you might need to make it happen.
Dr. Miller, we just talked about how it's going to happen, how we see it coming into being. You and I have already talked about this. This will be airing probably after the election, but we don't know. RFK Jr. is claiming that he's going to be part of the USDA if the election goes a certain way. And if that's the case, he's going to push through a lot of stuff. I prefer carrots to sticks. I prefer letting the free market work on its own, but the United States Department of Agriculture and its $213 billion annual budget is not going to probably do that. What do you see happening?
Well, what do I see happening? That's really hard. When you see what RFK Jr. says, this is a funny one, Kelly. I don't know if you've seen this. He says that we need to and we will move to an organic regenerative agricultural system. So he already says those two are the exact same thing. I don't even know what that means. I don't know what that means.
Which thing? Someone was trying to get a hold of me. I'm sorry. I just pulled a Kelly. I looked at my phone. RFK Jr. says, I want to switch to a what organic system? Yeah.
Quote unquote, organic regenerative system.
Oh, okay. So he's putting them both in the same. He's using, because those buzzwords work for suburbia, even though they're actually two not even the same things. Regenerative doesn't say. Regenerative practices don't say you can't use chemical. Gabe Brown in his very book says, you give me the choice between using chemistry or tillage, I'll use chemistry. He's more of a fan of chemistry than of tillage, Gabe Brown is. And organic tills the shit out of stuff. I mean, so organic and regenerative are technically fairly different, fairly disparate practices.
To me, and if you can make that leap to be organic and regenerative, all the more better, because I was listening to, and we were just talking about this beforehand, was it Rick Clark? RFK Jr. did a podcast with Rick Clark, and he's this big regen guy, 7,000 acre farmer in Indiana. And it was pretty fascinating. He sounds a lot like you, Kelly. He said his whole thing is, I wouldn't say my system is right for everybody. You need to see what's good for you. You need to take your time with it. You need to learn how to do things. I mean, I think RFK heard that and just completely forgot everything that Rick Clark said about taking your time and learn how it works with you. He just heard the word regen and organic together because Rick Clark is also organic. But he's talking about the economics of it, why it's working for him. He was talking about bids that he had on his soybeans for $40 a bushel. Yeah, I can make a lot of things work for $40 a bushel. But okay, let's say everybody moves that way. Is everybody getting $40 a bushel for their soybeans? Then what does that do to the costs of us everyday consumers that are buying the byproducts of those crops? I think that we don't often think about all the unintended consequences. Some people have really kind of chiseled out this niche that they can grow organics, and we live in a society where we're affluent enough where we can buy organic food. Good for us, good for the guys that are growing it, that can make that high margin on it. But the reason that we live in the society we do is we have cheap food. If that food isn't cheap anymore because now it costs that much more to produce it, because we're forcing everybody very quickly to cut out all the practices that have allowed them to yield the way that they have up to this point, and we're going to tell everybody that they have to do it a certain way that we haven't learned how to do it. It already doesn't yield as good as anything else. Overnight, we're going to be in a world of hurt as a consumer for what that's going to do to downstream prices in the grocery store and everything that we do.
Well, there's no question. If it was by government decree that we have to completely upend how we've been doing things on 360 million acres of farmed property, food producing land in the United States, it could be catastrophic, and we don't want that. I do think the fusion will happen. My hope is that it happens. My hope is that it happens more voluntarily or with a little bit of a carrot incentive, not by vast sweeping. And
well, I'd say I'd go a step further and say I'd hope that people recognize that it's already happening, and highlighting people like Kelly and this Rick Clark and learning more about what they're doing, and also giving credit for people that are already taking steps in that direction and encouraging people to continue to take that direction. If people are now reducing tillage already, they're moving to no-till, great. They're starting to add cover crops into their system, great. Let's look at how we are already moving that direction, encourage more people to move that way versus, nope, none of that was good enough. You're going to go all whatever we call regen tomorrow and have to do it that way.
Kelly, organic, like I said, the things about organic, they were always big on, for instance, using manure and some cover cropping. They just happen to be overboard on tillage, and they also use chemistry. Even though people think organic means no chemistry, they use outdated chemistry because it was believed to be safe, or they use stuff like copper sulfate. And so, I've seen examples of organic properties that are so copper poisoned, So try to convince me that that's good for the environment. The first thing you did is reduce toward in regenerative. And then obviously you're doing stuff with cover crops, and then you're doing stuff with the cattle. On the soil front, the biggest sin that I see the person that should dabble into some level of regenerative is protecting the soil instead of tilling the hell out of it. And what I see in your neighborhood is still too much tillage, winter tillage, fall tillage. I think that that's where the biggest sin is being made against all this right now. Am I right?
Yes, there's a fair amount of tillage that goes on everywhere. I really like no-till because I like it. Well, number one, in my hills with the erosion and things like that, the conservation. But the ability to allow that residue to rot or break down naturally over time and return it to the earth as more fertility is, and this, the plant food I spray, the manure Josh speaks about, we use manure as well, or this no-till stover. I don't like to bale cornstalk bales, because I want to leave that K, the K that's in the corn stalks. I want to leave it out there. I want to allow it to break down. It's the fertilizer that comes back. It's the good fertilizer, if you will. I believe that in Neil Kinsey's book, when a nutrient has been through a plant once, it's 10 times more available to the next plant. That's why manure, the cornstalk residue, the plant food is a superior fertility product to me to synthetic. Now, if you don't have the ability to have manure or something like that, and you have to use some synthetic, I agree. I don't think that that's wrong. You have to do what's best for you. But that's the reason that I have made strides to move in that direction, because we see a yield benefit from it and an ROI benefit from it.
Dr. Josh Miller, when we talk about regenerative and organic and conventional fusing, a lot of people are going to listen to this and say, well, that's cool that Kelly's doing cover crops, reducing tillage and all that sort of stuff, and having cows, but you still use a lot of chemistry. Answer the person that says, how do you pull chemistry out of the equation? Because obviously your book, you've talked about chemistry. You've talked about how zealots like RFK Jr., every time he refers to chemistry, he calls it toxic chemicals. Yeah. He never says beneficial chemistry.
Yeah, my question would be, why do we need to remove the chemistry from the equation? Because you're right. He says toxic chemicals.
Well, he would tell you because there's glyphosate in Fruit Loops. That's why he would tell you.
Yeah, well, for those that don't know, he is the one that sued Monsanto the first time and won that big case in California for $289 million. So he is the one that has taken this fight to the agricultural industry, and has found these, kind of liberal judges and juries that will rule in his favor. I went into length and it got really dry, and I apologize for those that were able to get through the regulation part of it, but I wanted to let everybody know the regulatory process that goes into bringing a new chemistry to market. You and I both talked at length about DDT and how amazing it was as a chemistry. It would never get labeled today, because we used to want chemicals that would kill, or if it was an insecticide, we wanted something that was going to kill every insect and last as long as possible. That's just not the way that we do things anymore. It needs to be as selective as possible to only kill the one thing that you want it to kill, and be so low persistence that it only lasts for as long as it needs to last. That's the way that chemistry works today. There's all the things we can talk about with risk cup. We've reduced the risk tolerance that we have in this country for good. This is a good thing. We've reduced risk tolerance so much that the standards that chemicals have to meet to be registered today, there's no other word to say it than that they are safe. They've been tested through every which way you can think of, from environmental to human health to every other standard you can think of. And we're using them because we need them, right? So my question would be, okay, well, people want these toxic chemicals out of their food. I would challenge them to show me why they're toxic. One, how are they toxic? And then what's the alternative? I would say that they're safe, because the process. One more thing, this has always been a cooperative process as well. When we talked about the FIFRA, the fungicide, insecticide, Rodenticide Act, when that first came and the food quality, this has always been a cooperative endeavor from environmental groups, from policymakers, from the farm group. And it was always a cooperative and a collaborative effort to make sure that they're producing the most safe food. This has been a collaborative and cooperative process since World War II, since we started this thing. But now there's a good guy and a bad guy all of a sudden, because we have, zealots that want to say, no, my way's right, you're bad, you're polluting, you're creating toxic chemicals, you're killing all of our children, whatever have you.
Kelly, are you gonna be able to farm without chemistry 10 years from now?
We are trying to move in that direction a little bit. It's not because I feel that I have to, but we do feel that, the dry years of say 21, 22, and 23, we feel that, the rotation of crops is good. However, the rotation of the chemistries for the bean and corn, they're saying, well, it's the crop safety. Well, we feel that there's some atrazine carryover. We feel that there's some PPO carryover. A PPO is the bean pre that we use. We feel that it hurts the corn next year in a dry year. Mm-hmm. And so next year will probably be 100% corn. Maybe that will go down some, the chemical carryover, but we're working to go away from that. We would like to use more of a dicamba type product as the residual in our corn. And one of the things we're going to try next year is an annual rye, which is different than cereal rye. At say V4 corn, we're going to try to we're going to try to broadcast annual rye, turnips, and radishes as our cover crop in V4 corn. We're going to, and TJ, my cover crop guy from BioTel, has talked about this. And so we need to use a residual product with a shorter tail, is how he talks about it. So then we can get the cover crops to come up. The cover crops should give us some compaction release, should give us some erosion control, and they'll give us some weed suppression. And if we can make that happen, then we'll be farming with less chemicals because of the weed suppression that they will offer. Right. He's talked about people doing it in southern Minnesota, things like that, because by the further you get north of me, the colder environment, you can't get cover crops to work after harvest. You have to do it. The challenge will be when we broadcast them, how do we get them to come up? It's going to take a rain to get it to come up, and what sort of germination are we going to get? He's talked about people going out with a hoe and kind of like tilling them in very lightly. I refuse to do that. That's going to be hard on my corn stand. That's not going to work for me. No. And so if I can make those cover crops work, we do want to turn down the chemicals. But the reason is we're seeing a chemical carryover that's hurting the yield. Yeah. Again, it always goes back to ROI for me.
Yep. By the way, I like that the point is, and we can do these practices. What if when we look at this future, and you didn't like being a future predictor, Josh, but I do. Okay. I think there's going to be programs. There's going to be government programs. There's going to be more of that. I am absolutely convinced of it. And some of it's going to be, again, carrot. Someone's going to be stick. Someone's going to be like, you have no choice but to file a sustainability program. I'm convinced that's coming in the next farm bill, probably, or two. When these things happen, they're not going to outlaw chemistry. I think the benefit, the road to regenerative is going to be mostly about soil. I hope it's about soil health. And that would mean reduction of tillage. But old habits die hard. Again, just go to Twitter, and you get people that, by God, they're going to go out there and till, cultivate until they can't anymore. What do you think about? Oh, yes, Kelly.
I think it already exists. If the Democrats get elected, I believe that there will be more government programs. If the Republicans get elected, I believe. I'm not trying to be overly optimistic, but I believe 45Z is the carrot that you talk about.
Oh, wow.
Because the lower you get the CI score, the higher the premium your corn's going to be worth. Therein lies your government program. Therein lies your carrot right there. So you need to reduce tillage. The use of manure versus commercial P&K lowers you 12 points right there. There's a lot of money in 12 points on 200 bushel of corn is worth $132 an acre. It's on my whiteboard right here.
I like that. So it's going to be incentive based. It's going to be incentive laden that takes us to regenerative. Probably not all the way to organic. Organic, I'll throw it out there, Josh. I think we're already capped out. The market's absorbed about as much. Organic's been a thing for about 30 years. I think it tends to not be growing anymore. I mean, it's not. It was the organic food consumption was growing at 30% a year, something like that, it's leveled off. Am I right?
I hope so. I hope so. I think the free market, yeah, I think you're right. I think the free market has kind of capped off what we can do. It would have to be other influences that kind of drive it that way.
Which becomes forced.
And until it's forced. And like you and I have talked about, I don't like to predict the future, and I feel like I've been like the doomsday guy here on this one. Sorry for Kelly and Damian, all your listeners. I feel like I'm just like Mr. Negative over here, but
we've had a lot worse. We've had a lot worse guests on than you. I mean, seriously,
okay.
It's fine.
Good. Well, thanks for that reassuring statement. But we've seen in 2021, like we talked about, Sri Lanka tried this, and this is a big push in other areas. And we haven't gotten into global agriculture. We don't need to do that today. But I feel like that's where the biggest sins of this forcing people to do things a certain way is happening. But Sri Lanka was an example. We said 2021, they said, we're buying into this ESG movement. We're going to be completely organic, synthetic fertilizer free.
Yep.
They said it. Government mandate. They couldn't use chemicals the next year. Agricultural productivity went down, I think 55% or something like that, or maybe that was the economic productivity overall. There was economic collapse, and the president of the country had to flee the country because there was revolt in the streets to get rid of him, because he basically destroyed the country because we let the ideology drive. No, this is the right thing. Everybody says this is the right thing to do. No, I think what Kelly's doing is amazing, and people like Rick Clark and people like Gabe Brown, these guys are doing the hard work for the rest of us out there to learn from. So that we can learn from their errors, so we can do things better. There are simple things that we're going to have to get rid of, or the first things to go, like the tillage, like we've talked about. But there's a lot cooler things to come that make this whole system work. And not everybody's going to do those things. Not everybody's going to try to broadcast cereal or annual rye into standing corn. That's really cool. We play with a lot of cover crops in Pennsylvania and tried to seed them earlier in the season into standing crops. And we had some success. We had a lot of failures too. That's the thing that's going to drive this thing forward. Incentives are going to do it, because right now we're in this just flat commodity crop. Right now it's just about how low can I get my inputs and how high can I get my yield to maximize that return on investment. The incentives are either going to be, how can I do things in a more quote unquote environmentally friendly way, or CI, whatever that's going to be, or how can I make some value in my crop better? How can I quantify the protein? How can I quantify some nutritive value of my crop and have a premium on it that way? I think those are the two ways that we're going to see people try to do more in their crops. Those two incentives, or we have a stick and then we all fail.
We said at the beginning, we said the how and the why of how these things all fuse together, regen, organic, and conventional fuse together. You just addressed it. The how, you went through it. You started cutting back on inputs and chemistry in particular, and then you tried to grow more, and then you cut back on fertility, applied synthetic fertility. Those are all steps toward regenerative, and then obviously cycling the cows into it. Then you with the why. Why it's going to happen? Well, it could be regulatory. Also, it's because of the economics. Some people right now are going to use this slowdown in commodity prices as an excuse not to do it, whereas you would say it's the time to do it, I think. Do we cover the why? It's going to happen because of the economics. It's going to happen because of regulatory. Is there any other reason why? People finally just care about their soil, and they don't want to just till the hell out of it and let it blow away. Is that the other reason?
Well, I think there's more education. There's more understanding. We continue to evolve and understand better, and we understand the value of it, and then the value of the land. We don't want to have waste ground anymore because it's worth $15,000 an acre, it's worth $10,000 an acre, it's worth $25,000 an acre, whatever region you live in. Yeah. And so the value of the land and then the value of the soil health, again, as long as we continue to try to learn and educate ourselves, we'll keep going in a direction to try to get better. And that's, I believe that's why we understand the value of the soil and the value of the carbon sequestered in it.
Yeah, like I said, I think the regenerative is where we're really going, not so much the organic. We'll grab a few of the organic practices, manure usage, cover cropping, but it's regenerative where I'm really, that's where we're really going.
I completely agree. I would tell you that if you have a market for your organics and your ROI is better, I think that's great. That I can't accomplish that, so I try to do a blend. To me, regenerative is a blend of the conventional and the organic practices to come up with what's most profitable for me.
I agree. His name's Kelly Garrett. He's one of the original founders of XtremeAg. We're joined by Dr. Josh Miller. Josh Miller wrote the book, Peeling Back the Labels. He's here as a guest. He might come back again because we like hearing from him. And yes, you get bored, word of the day, just go ahead and dictionary app in your phone and put in castigate. It's a great word. Anyway, thanks for being here, Josh.
Thanks, Damian.
Until next time, thanks for being here. You can check out the entire library of content just like this. Everything from the agronomics to the seed selection to the equipment to the finances to anything that happens on your farming operation. We have recorded 3.5 years worth of XtremeAg's Cutting the Curve. Literally hundreds and hundreds of episodes like this. Also videos with guys like Kelly at their field days, at events that they shoot. Sometimes I'm there with them. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of videos, all designed with one specific purpose: to help you farm better. Go check it out at XtremeAg.farm. So next time, thanks for being here. I'm Damian Mason with XtremeAg's Cutting the Curve.
That's a wrap for this episode of Cutting the Curve. Make sure to check out XtremeAg.farm for more great content to help you squeeze more profit out of your farming operation.